What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I'm Colin Newby of 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR, coming to you weekly with Philly Sports Talk. I got a big Sixers guest coming up today, and it'll be in the second segment after the break. Bob Cooney, longtime Sixers beat writer and one of the most insightful sports minds I know, also a former host at 97.5 The Fanatic. He's going to come on to talk about what a mess things have gotten to be down at the Wells Fargo Center.
Well, there's a lot of games left, and we've got to be professional. We've got to go out and play. First of all, everybody needs to look at themselves at what they can do better, and then look at what they can do better for the team and do our jobs and be professional.
That's Nick Nurse post-game on Monday night after a 32-point loss to the Chicago Bulls. And, ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't nearly that close. The Bulls were up by 50 at one point, nearing the biggest blowout in Philadelphia 76ers history. You had David Roddy get a few cheap buckets to make that score look a little bit better than the game actually was. But your coach just called out your team's professionalism, and he's on the hot seat right now with what a train wreck this team looks like, and no coach is going to be safe, whether it's really his fault or not, in this type of situation. But there's a bigger question here. What's next for the Sixers? Yes, but really, what's next for Joel Embiid? And in my conversation with Bob Cooney, I got some great info on the big fella, because Bob, his greatest strength is the concentration on original reporting from his experience down with the Sixers. And it looks like this Embiid saga might finally be coming to a head. They might keep him out for the rest of the season. Not sure if he plays another game after the time that I'm recording this episode. But a great conversation with Bob Cooney about the mess that's been this Sixers season, and that conversation is coming up after the break. But first, I'm going to go to sports radio's favorite sport.
I hate hockey and I don't like kids.
The NHL Four Nations Face-Off wrapped up last week, and I touched on most of the big conversation topics last week. And if you haven't listened to that yet, check out the episode in the show feed. That's more of a comprehensive look at what this tournament actually was, what it did for the game, but that was released one day before the championship game, and I wasn't leaving meat on the bone there. I put out my Flyers roundup the day after the USA-Canada, where Canada won in overtime. That really turned into Four Nations talk almost all the way through. And the real focus, the tournament itself was such a huge success. The intensity that these players kept up the whole time, the fights up in Montreal in the preliminary round, even the added heat of the political tension, the stage was really set for the two teams that pretty much everyone in the world outside of Scandinavia, Finland and Sweden, was looking for. But this tournament blew all reasonable expectations out of the water. And my biggest takeaway in the weekly Flyers roundup column was the poetic symmetry here with Team USA. The best international hockey I've ever seen was back in 2010, and I couldn't believe simple math gave me that was 15 years ago. But that year, USA lost to Canada in overtime of the gold medal game. That was in the Winter Olympics up in Vancouver. And Team USA had beaten Canada earlier in that tournament in the preliminary round. It was kind of a new group of Americans on that team. They were out to prove that they're not the little brothers of the hockey world anymore. There were just so many similarities to this tournament that it is kind of demoralizing for the Americans to have lost in the exact same fashion. If you remember back in 2010, there was the panic up in Canada after they lost that preliminary round game to Team USA. This was on their home soil, and they're supposed to be the hockey mecca. They had Martin Brodeur, arguably the best goaltender of all time, as their starter at that point. He was a little bit past his prime years, but they yanked him in the middle of that tournament, put Roberto Luongo in net, and then they end up winning the gold medal. But this year in the Four Nations face-off, fast forward 15 years, the whole conversation about Canada's weakness was goaltending, and then it ends up in overtime of the championship game. I don't think there was an actual gold medal to this tournament, but we are obviously inserting the final game here. But Jordan Binnington in overtime there really stole this game from Team USA when Connor Hellebuck, arguably the best goaltender in the world, was at the other end. It was Canada who somehow got the advantage in net. That was the biggest conversation topic. But remember how it ended for Team USA 15 years ago? Riding high going into the gold medal game. One of the best hockey games I've ever seen, by the way. They were trailing 2-1 in the final minute. Zach Parise sent it to overtime, and the best hockey player in the world ended it. Back then, it was Sidney Crosby. Now he's still on Team Canada. He was the captain in the Four Nations tournament. But at this point, Connor McDavid has taken over that title. He's the best hockey player in the world, and he roofed one for the overtime winner to send the Americans home again. Aside from that poetic symmetry, one big difference here in 2025 versus that silver medal team back in 2010, Team USA only has one more year before they get another shot at Canada. You got the Winter Olympics in 2026, and this Four Nations tournament, or at least originally, this was supposed to be like an appetizer in some ways, as ridiculous as that sounds, based on the competitive hockey that we just saw. But you're going to get a majority of the same guys on Team USA and on Team Canada only 1 year from now. The Olympics this will be the first time that the NHL players compete since 2014. But remember two important things here. You can't fight under IIHF rules. The Four Nations tournament, when you had the Kachuk brothers fight up in Montreal and the JT Miller, Colton Parayko fight, this was an NHL-sanctioned tournament. The NHL profited off it, and you played by NHL rules. These fights right off the opening face-off, they're not going to happen over in the Olympics. You get a game misconduct, and I believe it's a one-game suspension, but with the IIHF rules, you're not going to have that strategy over at the Olympics. And also, second thing to consider, the stage was set perfectly like I was talking about for Canada and USA, and I think they're the two best teams going into the Olympics next year again, but that doesn't mean that things are going to unfold exactly the same way. But a big part of the reason the stage unfolded that way this year is because only 4 countries were there. Finland and Sweden, yes, great teams. Finland was a little bit weaker this year, but I think the Swedes had a legitimate chance against these two teams. But in the 2026 Olympics, that's in Milano Cortina, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, over in Italy, it's not a guarantee by any means that you're going to have Team USA versus Canada in the gold medal game. You're going to have some variation of Russian representation that didn't exist in this Four Nations tournament. Russia probably could rival Sweden and even Team USA or Canada as one of the top hockey nations in the world. And the previous 2 times that international best-on-best took place before the Four Nations, Team USA didn't actually make it to the final to face Canada. The last time the Olympics had NHL players in 2014, Team USA lost to Canada in the semifinal round, which I do think most people looked at as the 2 most talented teams who happened to not make the gold medal game. But then 2 years later, you had the World Cup of Hockey, and the Americans were like terrible in that tournament. They were 0-3. They didn't even advance past the preliminary round. But I'm looking forward to the Olympics next year as a second act, even though there's no guarantees that the stage is just going to unfold with Team USA versus Canada, this big rivalry that we just saw. A lot of times in sports, you have to seize the moment because you don't know when an opportunity is going to strike again. I think there is a little bit of that possibility that the Americans need to acknowledge. But hey, they're going to get another crack over in Italy next February. And with the appetite for international hockey and how much the Four Nations face-off just succeeded, I think the entire hockey world, and like I talked about last week, the entire sports world is going to be looking forward to that one. One more topic I need to jump to before I move away from hockey, and that's the memory of Johnny Gaudreau. If you watch the championship game in the Four Nations face-off, you saw Mike Eruzione on the broadcast. He came out in a Johnny Gaudreau Team USA jersey, and that spanning a generation was just really awesome to see. This is one of the biggest stages we've seen in hockey in such a long time, and for an iconic guy like Mike Eruzione, the captain of the gold medal team back in 1980, to honor another American hockey legend, the departed Johnny Gaudreau, I thought that was just a beautiful display. And of course, that championship game was up in Boston. Johnny Gaudreau was a Boston College guy, and the crowd up in Boston at TD Garden was chanting Johnny Hockey in the arena at certain points. So that just in itself was a remarkable tribute after such a terrible tragedy where Johnny and his brother Matthew were killed. I believe it was last summer in a drunk driving accident over in New Jersey. But just a couple days later, I see another tribute on social media, and it's from Mark Scheig, the Columbus Blue Jackets reporter who joined First Time Long Time back in December to talk hockey when the Blue Jackets played the Flyers in Philadelphia. He was at the Columbus game on Saturday night. Mark put up a video of the Columbus crowd at Nationwide Arena singing Happy Birthday to Johnny's son in the arms of his mother, Meredith Morris, now Meredith Gaudreau. And it was really just a nice moment. She looked like she was choked up on the big screen out in Columbus. But I remembered when I saw that video, something that John Tortorella said back in December when the Flyers played the Columbus Blue Jackets. He said, "I'm not sure if it helps a grieving family, even though it's supportive when the hockey community is making all of these tributes. Does it help that grieving, or does it keep reminding a family of the tragedy?" Well, I think in this case, with Meredith showing up and celebrating with the baby like that, it's a way of the community showing support in the tragedy. And I was happy because I just traced back immediately to what Tortorella said. And it's good to see, at least in my outsider's perception, a great show of support from the hockey community for Meredith Gaudreau and the father, Guy Gaudreau, who's supposed to be a pillar of youth hockey in the Philadelphia area, South Jersey, really, very involved with the Hollydale Hurricanes over in like Washington Township area. Just an important guy in the community of youth hockey. and obviously somebody who was impacted by this terrible tragedy. We'll get to Bob Cooney and Sixers talk after the break.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I've been teasing two big Sixers guests since I got started going to the games back towards the beginning of the season, and I finally landed the first one. It's Bob Cooney, longtime beat writer for the Daily News and the Philadelphia Inquirer, following the legendary Phil Jasner. And we also worked together at 97.5 The Fanatic for about 3 years. What's up, Bob? Thanks for coming on the show.
Colin, thanks for having me. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. So this is the perfect time to get you on because you were around all the way back at the beginning of Joel Embiid's career. You talked about this for a long time on the radio too. Bob, first of all, what do you expect in the immediate sense with how the messaging is handled the rest of this year and how this disaster with Embiid will infect the Sixers and their off-season planning?
Yeah, the immediate effect, I would term it, Colin, would be that I think he's going to get shut down. I think the team has finally come to that realization and is, doctors or whatever, that this just isn't working. And, do they know if rest will help? I don't know. It appears that they really don't know. I don't want to say know much of anything. I don't think there's a definitive way to maybe heal this or to fix this. So maybe that's why they let him go to the Olympics, which I was a proponent for. I wanted him to go over there and be with the best players in the world and see how they work. And, if he was going to be doing anything during that time off, why not be over there? Now, people say, I heard a guy on a radio station, he keeps saying he never should have gone over there. Well, did you want him to stay here and play against what? Some of the, backups for this? No, I didn't mind the experience of him going over there. He only played when he played and wasn't all the time, about 17 minutes a game. So whatever. I think that he'll be shut down now. I think that the fandom is getting towards being done with him. And it's a shame because you see how good he is when he's healthy. Colin, I don't know where you go with this. I just don't. I don't know if you shut this season down, maybe sit Paul George and do different things and see where it lands you in a lottery and then start again next year. Or if you're the Sixers, come to the realization that he's just never going to be the same again, I don't know where you go. I don't know what they are going to do. And quite frankly, I don't really know what they should do.
Yeah, Bob, I think you bring up a good point in one thing that you said because it goes back to a point I've made on this show. I think a lot of people are under the assumption that the shut him down for the season, let him get the surgery, that kind of implies that it will make it all better by next year. And I don't think it's such a straightforward answer. That's my problem. Does that surgery just get him healthy from game one next year? Probably not with the body of work that we have. But, Embiid was always a great talent. We've known that for a lot of years now. Number 3 pick in the draft, probably a Hall of Famer. But he sat out the first 2 seasons after the Sixers drafted him, back while you were still covering the team. What was your impression on how Joel Embiid was treating his body at that point, based on personal conditioning, diet, and any injury management you were familiar with back in the early years of his career?
Yeah, there was always question marks, Colin. So Embiid's first year, he's there. They knew he was going to be out for the season. We were on a road trip on the West Coast. I think I was in Sacramento or something. And we always asked the same question. It was only 2 of us that traveled with the team at the time for the media. But we always asked the same question, can we talk to Joel tonight? Can we talk to Joel tonight? Can we talk to Joel tonight? The answer was always no, but we had to ask. So this one night we asked and we were told he's not here. And what do you mean he's not here? He came out here with you. Yeah, he was sent home for not following. Now this was kind of off the record stuff, but it's known now, for not following the conditioning regimen that the team had requested him to do. So that's his rookie year, sent home. That raises, a little bit of a red flag. Then I remember distinctly having a conversation with Sam Hinkie. We were in Utah, Summer League, and it was going into Embiid's second year. And I sat down, had a one-on-one with Sam Hinkie in Utah, asked him all these questions about Joel, wrote a big story about it and all that. Didn't say anything about him not playing the next year, whatever. The next day, I came home for a 2-day break, and then I had to go out to Las Vegas for Summer League that was starting out there. The next day, Sam Hinkie lets us know, yeah, Joel's going to be out for the year. My point being, the way they've always handled him has seemed weird. So then in that second year, he's trying to recover. We would see him out there, the famous, he went up and dunked one time when he shouldn't have, and he hurt his leg. We saw him out there in flip-flops shooting baskets at the practice facility. I'm sorry, I played high school and junior college basketball. We were never allowed on the floor unless our shoes were tied, ankles taped, all of that. Here's a guy that was allowed to do pretty much whatever he wanted. And Colin, I've always thought that was part of the problem. Yes, Joel Embiid at times, I think, with the story I just told, probably didn't rehab himself the best way he should have and the way the organization wanted him to. But I will also say, I think the organization let him do what he dictated an awful lot throughout his career. And has that led to the point where we are now, Colin? Maybe it has. The question is a legitimate one.
So I think it's a real possibility that in a lot of indirect ways, this has probably led to the injury history, but it's tough to put your finger on that. The
Sure.
thing I've always pushed back with a little bit, and this is in terms of the conditioning and just when people accuse him of being irresponsible, basically. You hear these off-season stories about how he's basically taught himself new skills. Like the one I'm thinking of is the Dirk Nowitzki jump shot, the little push away. Can you criticize a guy's mentality away from the game or his off-season commitment when that's the case, where he's had this kind of skill acquisition that we've heard about for so long?
Well, it's funny. I think that might play into some of the problems here. I was sitting alongside Joel Embiid one time. We were sitting on a scores table at practice. He started talking about Hakeem Olajuwon. And he said, I've been watching tape. He goes, I can do the shake. I said, you haven't been on a court in months. He says, trust me, I got it. When he was allowed to get on the court, kind of looked over, gave a wink, boom, boom, there he does the Hakeem shake. And it looked as natural as could be. This guy is a freak athlete. He could do things. Colin, I was sitting one time, again, on a table next to him. He was injured, still out with the foot. A basketball came over. The guys were playing at the other end, came over. He kicked it up with his foot off of the floor and started soccer dribbling it. Knee, foot, knee, foot, knee, foot, and then kicked it back to them while he was sitting on a scorer's table. And I just looked and I'm like, oh my God, what kind of an athlete is this guy? So he comes in, he is that good. He can imitate Dirk Nowitzki, as you said, a Hakeem Olajuwon, other moves that he could just come and do. I always thought, wow, coaching, you don't really have to coach that. The guy's coming here with all that talent. You don't coach that. Here's the one thing I've always said, Colin, I've said it for years, and I'm sure you heard me say it when we were working together at the radio station. The one thing Joel Embiid was never taught how to do, in my opinion, was jump hard and land. It sounds silly, but have you ever listen to this? Have you ever seen Joel Embiid like jump over people, like jump way high in the air? Probably not. When he got hurt after Kansas and he was trying out for the NBA, he was 6'9". He broke his foot, and sources have told me that they measured him before he started playing again. He was 7'2". Okay, he was listed as 6'11" at Kansas. I was told he was really 6'9". He starts then at 7'2". So imagine yourself. You've never jumped. It's like putting platform shoes on, right, Colin? And all of a sudden you're landing and you're at 7'2" instead of 6'9". That land comes a lot quicker because you're a lot bigger.
Okay.
I honestly think he never properly learned with his body that he took to the NBA how to jump and land correctly. And I think that led to a lot of the falling down. He said he was told to fall down. I don't believe that for a second. I don't think he was taught how to land properly. And I think that affected his knees, feet, and all the injuries that he's had in his legs.
Yeah, just going back through all the intricacies of what's happened over his time with the Sixers, it's so hard to nail down what causes injuries or you just get injured. This has been a conversation surrounding him a lot. So a lot of these little nuggets, Bob, are great that you can bring from just covering Joel Embiid and seeing him up close for so many years. But I want to go back to the beginning of the season for just 1 minute. He had the incident where he shoved the local media member because he was insulted by the recent column. And there's obviously a lot going on there, a lot to unpack. It's a big conversation about crossing boundaries. But I had Kevin Cooney on after that whole story, and Kevin was in the locker room when that happened. He saw the altercation.
Right.
Kevin told me that Embiid basically said, I don't care what the media thinks. And the columnist responded, well, yes, you do. And that's what really set the thing off. Bob, is Embiid worried about the media's opinions, and is he worried about all the wrong things? And does that take away from his competitive drive from being an NBA player versus what we've seen of the Mamba mentality or any of the all-time greats that we glorify?
I don't know if it takes away. It's a great question. I don't know if it takes away, Colin. Like these pro athletes are driven. They can be driven by the smallest of things. You know, we know Michael Jordan. He would get pissed off at somebody beating him at tossing nickels against the wall. You know, he would get pissed off at that. Great athletes, and all these guys are, and most of them are very, very competitive. I relate it to this. We see how talented Joel Embiid is, right? We see the things, oh my God, the unbelievable things he can do on a basketball court. He has been hampered by injury pretty much his whole career. Is there an amount of frustration that has been built up since he started in the NBA? He's not human if it hasn't, right? So there's probably a tremendous amount of frustration and then fans questioning and all that. Sure, they hear it. Absolutely. I don't know how many athletes have come to me and said, oh, I read your story on this after telling me I don't read the paper or I don't listen to the radio. They do. And that's fine. So what happened with him there? Yes, frustration build up. Does it affect him playing on the court? I don't think so. I really don't. I don't think he's going up and down the floor saying, you know, I have to make this play because Marcus Hayes had a column that said, you know, I don't care, whatever he said. Or I don't think that affects. I just put it to the human nature more of it, Colin, to say he's a human being and he's frustrated because of what's happened to him and he's not able to perform as he can. And that's maybe one way that he took it out.
I'll switch gears for one last Sixers question. Go a little bit larger scale here, and address the whole kind of mess that is the organization in general. I was always a little bit more skeptical during the process than I think a lot of other people were. And I want to hear it from somebody who was there during the Sam Hinkie years. When you just disregard the competitive spirit of professional sports the way they did and just deliberately try to manipulate the system like they did, does it have an impact, a lasting impact of the preceding years, like with the busted draft picks, the entitled superstars, the lack of stability in the front office? How much do you really link those two things?
I don't know if I
I know
do.
it's a
Like,
very large scale question.
no, it's good. People have asked me an awful lot. Did they develop a losing mentality and
Basically,
therefore they can't get rid of it? So when Brett Brown got here, it was a day or two after his introduction to the media. He and I went out to dinner, and all he talked about was culture, culture, culture. That's what he was brought here for, to build a culture. Well, he wasn't building a culture in the first few years by having Colin Newby starting at point guard and Bob Cooney at shooting guard. And that's basically what he was given. So the losing culture, I didn't really put a lot into it because once they started to try to win, when Embiid got healthy and all that stuff, who was still around from losing that culture? You know, like they got rid of Sam Hinkie. All the players that came through here were pretty much out. It wasn't like they were asking really good players that were going to stick around to not try hard. And I'll tell you, Colin, I don't know if I ever told you this. The most impressive thing I ever saw throughout the process, and I saw 26 straight losses. I saw 50-point losses on consecutive nights. I saw games played in front of, I think, hundreds of people instead of thousands. I saw some pretty bad crap. The most impressive thing was they would lose 2 nights in a row by 50 plus points. And the next time they were in the gym, they would be going at it like crazy. Now, these were guys that were trying to make the NBA, but Brett Brown was good enough at building that, like, look, you're auditioning for the NBA. And those were the type of players they had. Now, fast forward when they're trying to win, he's trying to build a culture like they had in San Antonio, where he was an assistant coach before he came to Philadelphia. I don't think that all that losing carried over to it. However, I don't think the 76ers organization has ever upped themselves to a culture of which they were looking for when they got Brett Brown, when they decided to tank to get better, because they never got past that second round. And you can't call yourself a winning culture, a winning organization, until you're there. And there's a feel of it, Colin. You're around sports. I'm around, I've been in the New England Patriots locker room, in a San Antonio Spurs locker room, Miami Heat locker room. When those teams are really good, you just feel that culture. The Sixers never got it. I tweeted this last night. I will not call Embiid a loser or the Sixers a loser organization, but I will say neither are winners. Maybe yet, maybe ever. Like, hear what I'm saying. Embiid's won MVPs and stuff like that. My definition of a winner is carrying your team to multiple NBA, not just championships, but appearances and championships, whatever. So I don't say he's a loser, and I got a lot of tweets, oh, he's a loser. I don't think he's a loser, but I don't think he's been upped in my book, because I think it's a team thing, as a winner, nor is the 76ers organization, in my opinion.
And at this point in time, I just don't think that many of our listeners, any of Sixers fans anywhere, are really in a legitimate state of belief that that's ever going to change. When he's 30 years old and we're going through the things that we're going through, how is this going to change?
Part of it's a shame this year, because I think Yabusele, I like him as a piece.
I do too.
Paul George, I mean, I've gotten guys that say it's a total waste of time. I can see where the three of them could be really good if they're playing every night together, on instances. And then you look at some of the other pieces they have, because, look, that's what you're looking for when you have a big three, and I use the air quotes there. You're looking for pieces. And Yabusele, Drummond being a backup, that's good. And then you have some guys that are interesting, like a Ricky Council at times is interesting. McCain, I loved watching him play, and he surprised the hell out of me. So there was stuff that was like, you sit back and you say, man, if they were all healthy, you wonder. But Sixers fans don't want to do that, and I understand why, because they've done that for so long. If they were healthy, ... Well, that's getting old and tiring, and I understand why people have given up on it.
Yeah, well, I wasn't in the business yet for the process years, but I'll tell you, I was there on Monday night. They only lost by 32 points, but the Bulls' largest lead was 50, and I
Yeah.
think they deserved to lose by 50. So, I mean, you make a couple good points about how to be optimistic. I think everybody loves Yabusele, but it's tough to feel an overarching sense of optimism.
No,
In the world
absolutely.
of the
I
Sixers.
hear you. I can understand there being no optimism. I'm saying you wonder. You wonder if everybody was healthy, if there was some pieces. Because again, what Paul George was, what Joel Embiid was, and what Tyrese Maxey was. You were hoping that they were maximum of that coming into this year. So therefore, you're just looking at pieces after that. And I thought maybe they had some intriguing pieces after that. But once again, it all fell apart due to injury to one of the best players in the league, in Joel Embiid.
And it's funny you just brought up my buzzword because I had one final question that wasn't Sixers related. You used the word you taught me a long time ago, intriguing. You always used to say it about John Tortorella. He's an interesting guy, the Flyers coach that I've covered for a couple years. Bob, who's the most intriguing guy that you covered? I have a feeling you'll go Sixers because that was your most exposure. But in your time, who's the most intriguing guy that you've covered? Athlete, coach, whoever.
Sam Hinkie would have to be right up there. I told a story. It's funny. Somebody asked me about covering the Sixers yesterday or the day before. They were shocked when I said, they were like, yeah, that Hinkie was. I said, yeah, you know what's weird? Like, I'd be sitting home at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night or something. My phone would ring, and it'd be Sam. Kind of just wanting to, he might say, look, this is off the record, but I wanted to ask you some stuff, or I wanted to see what you thought about stuff, or, this and that. Sam is very, and I said, I guarantee if I called Sam Hinkie right now, he'd pick up the phone and we could pick up a conversation just like we did when, he was here. So he was intriguing. People I consider intriguing doesn't, like you and I had this kind of argument a little bit. We didn't argue, but when I said that Tortorella was intriguing, you were kind of like, how can you like him? Or something like that. And I said, Colin, intriguing doesn't mean that you like something. To me, it's interesting. It doesn't matter if I like or dislike. It's just interesting. So Hinkie is definitely up there. Tortorella, who I've only spoken to a few times, I would love to sit down and just follow him for a year and try to figure out what he's got going on up there.
The psychology of that guy's brain, it blows my mind personally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Greg Popovich is another one. Talking to him numerous times throughout my career, and Brett Brown being his best friend and learning some things about Popovich. You see what he is in front of a microphone, and then you talk to him maybe off of a microphone, and that's intriguing. That's a guy whose brain I would like to pick even more. So there's been a lot, but Sam Hinkie might take this title, Colin.
Well, Bob, you always give some good insight. I appreciate you coming on for so much time, and I hope to talk with you again soon. Thanks a lot, man.
Anything for you, buddy. Take care.
Think about all the substance that we got from Bob Cooney in that interview, and that's why he's probably my favorite host at 97.5 The Fanatic that I've ever worked with. One of the ones I enjoyed listening to most because he does bring that kind of substance. He has the experience to draw back on and to give you so much information there about Joel Embiid, who is a remarkable talent, who I mentioned in the interview. I think he probably is going to the Hall of Fame, and he's maybe the most talented Sixer I've ever seen. But make no mistake about it, Bob just told you that there have been plenty of warts over the years with Joel Embiid and with the way the Sixers have handled this whole situation. Listeners have probably been able to tell that I'm not the biggest fan of the way the Sixers handle their business, but I've criticized them at plenty of points over time, and I think that they've handled their business poorly. And speaking to Bob Cooney, a guy I worked with for a couple of years, you see part of the things that have shaped my perception on that one. But I speak in the way I introduce myself as a supporter of the team, not a traditional fan anymore. I'm still very skeptical, critical of the way that they've handled their business, especially over the past 10 years or so with the process and with some of the mess that's come after the Sam Hinkie years. And some of the stories that Bob was talking about are a big part of what shapes my perception. We worked together for a couple of years, and the things that Bob comes up with, some of the stories that he shared now just in that interview, and some of the things that he's told to me off the record, they're a big part of what makes me doubt so much in the Sixers' overall vision. So I think it's hard to show really any optimism in what this franchise is doing, but they're going to have some decisions to make. We're going to see what happens with the injury plan with Joel Embiid. I don't know if Nick Nurse's job is safe. I don't know if Daryl Morey's job is safe, and it's possibly going to be an offseason of turmoil in Philadelphia. I'm looking to release some Phillies content on 975thefanatic.com in the next week or so. So on the next episode of First Time, Long Time, possibly get some spring training conversation, and I will talk to you then, Philadelphia.